Welcome back to the Newsletter Crew podcast. My name is Allie Montag. This is the podcast where we talk about writing, growing, and monetizing your newsletter. We'll get advice, strategies, and lessons from the best in the business. Today, I'm interviewing Christopher Sofer, the co-founder and CEO of Letterhead, a platform which offers business tools for newsletters. Christopher also is the co-founder of Where By Us, a network of local newsletters. He's an expert at building and growing not just newsletters, but the vibrant communities around them. Today's episode is sponsored by Aweber, the easiest platform you can use to get started writing your newsletter. With friendly customer support available whenever you need, Aweber can get your newsletter business up and running in minutes. All right, let's get started. So maybe to start, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, how you started the company, where it began, just sort of its origin story.
Absolutely. We started Letterhead in 2020, building off of a business we started as newsletter publishers ourselves back in 2014, which now feels like a million years ago, and I think in the life of like newsletter publishing specifically was like prehistoric era. But we started a local newsletter network called Where By Us, and we first launched it with a brand in Miami in 2015 called The New Tropic. And growing from that brand in Miami that we first started, we ended up launching with some awesome people in Seattle, Portland, and Pittsburgh, all like local journalists who wanted to start their own thing. We're thinking about a local product, we're thinking about email, and we were able to sort of partner with them and provide sales and infrastructure and ops and tech and all these other things to help them kind of go pursue their vision for their content brand. So that was sort of how we built Where By Us, is this network of local newsletters where we at the central level were kind of engaged in the unsexy work around, G&A and how do you keep the trains running and what tools do you use and all these kinds of things. And then we had folks on the ground doing all the content and community building. And we've built that business up. It's profitable, generates about $1.5 million in revenue every year, and has been going strong. And about midway through last year, we started to see that there was some demand and some need from other publishers we were meeting for the kind of tools that we had actually built internally for ourselves just to make our work easier. And that's where Letterhead came from.
Very cool. And when you were getting started with Where By Us, what opportunity did you identify in local news or in local newsletters? Why did that seem like an opportunity that was available to pursue?
The very vague first answer is that we identified a need around community for locals. We would meet all these people in Miami, this growing place, a lot of people moving there, a lot of natives, returning back to Miami, people who grew up there and spent their whole lives there, people who grew up and left and came back, people who were new, engaging in this kind of cultural moment where all this new stuff was happening and there was all this growth, and it felt really cool and exciting to be in Miami. It still does. But at this time, there was a lot of that churn happening, a lot of that growth, and people were really excited by it. But we would also meet all these locals who were like, I don't feel like I'm plugged into what's going on. I'm like excited to be here, but I don't really understand what's happening. Or, I'm barraged by information, but I don't feel informed. Like these kind of contradictory things that people would say. And so what we recognized out of that was that there was this sense of community and belonging that people were really craving. And traditional like local news from the newspaper is not designed to do that. And so we saw an opportunity to potentially make contribution there. And I say all that because our initial business plan was not just a newsletter. It was also like we were going to do events. We were going to open a bar. We were going to do all these other kinds of things that were part of the plan. And as we went, we fortunately had some smart advisors and we did some more research and we peeled back some of those elements that weren't really a core part of the product and got to this is a newsletter first, and then we can build a community around it with these other kinds of content and events and things like that. And the reason we picked email was that we just did a lot of user research. We spent a bunch of time digging in with people about their day, about their habits, and we learned where they were consuming information, what their days look like, what devices they were using. And one of the things we observed is that when people roll out of bed in the morning, they check their phone, they read their email. When they're on the train or they're in the car on the way to work, they're looking at their email. And when they get to the office, they're logging in and checking their email. And then when they're wrapping up for the day, it's often the last thing people check. And we observed people doing this because we were doing this research where we would follow people around the city and literally just fly on the wall behind them for the day and take notes on what we saw them doing. And that was what led us to, hey, email could actually be a really great way to build this kind of community. And I mention all of that because I think one of the challenges that folks in the newsletter space make, similar to the rest of the media industry, where my co-founders and I have been kicking around media product design and product research for a long time, one of the mistakes that I think folks make that's very easy, and I've been there too, is that you go out and you ask customers like about your product specifically, and you say, hey, do you like email newsletters, or would you read an email newsletter, or what other newsletters do you read, or these other kinds of questions that are sort of like push polling. You're kind of hoping you find the answer you want. And I think to do really smart research and really have this deep understanding of what your users or your community need, you have to take your products and your ideas out of the equation and just be listening. What are people doing all day? How are they getting to work? What are they doing for fun? Not injecting this idea of like, well, I want to make this product, so let me look for that. You have to sort of take those blinders off and just like observe, and that's going to give you much deeper conviction about your audience and how you're serving them and what the opportunities are. And fortunately, we stumbled into that approach and it really worked for us. So that was how we initially chose newsletters, and then everything just snowballed from there.
I love what you said about this experience of I read everything and yet I feel like I know nothing. I think that's an increasingly common phenomenon in the era of unlimited access to digital media. What is it about newsletters and the format of email specifically that you think sort of solves that problem, or the community that Whereby Us was building? Is it a mix of those two elements of the newsletter plus community? How do you solve for the experience of adding one more additional piece of media into somebody's already probably very active media readdership?
I read everything and yet know nothing is going to be the name of my memoir, I think. But so it's a great question, right? Because obviously if one of your insights is, man, people sure are overwhelmed with the amount of content, let's add some more. It's kind of an odd choice to sort of react to that. But I think the deal is that email is really useful for that for a couple of reasons. One is that it's so choice oriented. Right. And I mean, people in the newsletter crew community already know these things, but just maybe it adds a little bit of conviction or fuel to the fire for folks who are thinking about this. So part of it is just very respectful of choice if you do it the right way. Obviously, there's a ton of spam email that is not respectful of you as a recipient, but I think newsletters as a product are pretty good about this, right? You choose to subscribe. With a lot of tools, you have to double opt in, so you've like definitely chosen to subscribe. It sits there in your inbox. A lot of people filter it or send it to a different folder, whatever. It sits there in your inbox. You can open it if you want to. You can finish reading it if you want to. You can block the images if you don't want, images or ads to appear. Like you can control so much about the experience that I think it engenders this kind of moment of trust. And when it's done well, the email is this really high prized piece of information people have trusted you with as a publisher, and they're there because they want to be, right? Typically. And so all of that, I think, helps just at a baseline level versus other places where one might consume content where you're just being like bombarded with stuff. And when we started, of course, the competition was like website articles and pages, right? And we made a deliberate choice to like not put any energy into our website. Now, of course, you have like new social apps like your TikToks or things like that, and you have like video and podcasts, these other channels where the dynamics are a little different. But at the time, it was sort of, do we go do things that are broad and out in the open and, it's all about impressions and page views and social followers, or do we do something that's tighter and deeper and about, engaging the right people more deeply? And that was the choice that we made. I think email lends itself really well to that. Plus, it has some business benefits in that you have this first party data. But all of that said, it's still absolutely true what you're saying, which is you're still adding another piece of content to the pile. So how do you do that? I think some of the things we've always thought about are keep it really short, right? There's always going to be motivation to make your product way too long. So keep it short and simple. 2, how do you really focus on adding value and helping users navigate it? So don't make it too laden with text or hard to read or navigate. And then 3, how do you make sure that there's enough variety in what you're highlighting and the way you're approaching it, and like little fun kind of bits of treasure that people can find along the way that make it a unique experience every time. I think that's also a really crucial part of it, where we've tried to draw from inspiration from some of the leading folks in the space. But if you're just sending like, hey, here's the top 10 articles today, that's sort of like lazy email strategy, and sometimes that's what you want to do. But if you're trying to really build a community, I think you have to be a bit smarter than that. And when you put in that effort to make each day's product unique, users, in our experience, see that, and that's reflected back in the engagement you get. So I think those are some of the ways we've tried to do it tactically day to day to sort of keep the engagement up and help the product feel different from what else people might be getting in their inbox.
I love what you're saying about basically putting the reader's needs first. I've always thought newsletters are a unique media product in that the end user is the primary stakeholder that is considered, just what is the reader's experience, as opposed to lots of media products where you have dual stakeholders. You have your advertisers and then you have your readers, and sometimes those incentives are different, and yet with newsletters they seem to be very closely aligned. If you put the needs of the readers first, that is a benefit to the readers, but also a benefit to the advertisers. How have you thought about aligning readership with advertisers or partners, or who do you consider the key stakeholder, and how do you build a product that really suits their needs?
Do you mean, is this key stakeholder the advertiser or the reader?
I just think I think it's always such an interesting tension with media companies, the difference between the stakeholder of, well, what does it look like if we put the advertiser first versus what does it look like if we put the reader first? You know, at those sort of really big media companies, a lot of the focus is on growth and eyeballs and clicks, and how do we optimize our strategy such that we get the widest reach possible, such that our advertisers have the biggest opportunity to sell paper towels or whatever it is that they're trying to market to their audience. But with newsletters, that dynamic is inverted because it's really based on loyalty and engagement and open rates. I'm just curious how you think about that balance of, is it that the reader comes first no matter what, and that's what enables you to build relationships with advertisers, or how do you sort of view that relationship?
I love that question. Here's what we have come to decide, and this is through years of trial and error and getting it wrong many times before we got it right, but hopefully others. Part of what's fun about doing Letterhead now is like, hey, now we're helping other publishers learn from all of our mistakes as well as the successes. So we have come to feel that if you are in a place where you have to choose which of those things comes first, the business isn't set up correctly, right? And that's not a criticism of anybody. I think it's super hard, and we've gotten that wrong a whole lot. And you can go interview my co-founders if you want to find out how I specifically caused a lot of that by being out, because I was the one out there selling ads, right? And it took us a long time to to figure this out. But if it feels like there is a choice between what is in the interest of advertisers and what is in the interest of readers, and that those things are at some level mutually exclusive or opposite, or pulling in different directions, that's a signal that you haven't lined up one or both sides of that equation, right? If you are building a community of really tightly engaged, niche, high-value readers, and you're trying to sell, in your example, paper towels, it's never going to work, right? Because paper towels are a super low-ring item. The ad budget is like it's consumer packaged goods, right? And Procter & Gamble and these kind of big advertisers, lowest dollar reach. How can I reach the broadest audience possible? Because everybody buys these things, right? It's a completely different mentality that those ad buyers are looking for than what I, as a publisher of a small niche audience with good engagement numbers, does. And so there's a fundamental mismatch there. And that means maybe I can still get them to buy the ad, right? I get that initial signal, hey, someone's buying this ad, but they're going to push me more. How do I get more subscribers? How do we get more reach, right? But is more reach what's right for my readers? Maybe not. And that's because those things are not lined up right? So if I have a really high engagement, niche audience, like I've got a newsletter for people who are, startup marketing people or something like that. There are a ton of products that are geared specifically to startup marketing people. Those are the only advertisers I should be targeting, at least initially, because what are they going to care about? Who are the people who are subscribed? How engaged are they with the content, right? Like that is what matters to them. And is this a brand that they trust? Because then if my product for startup marketers shows up in the newsletter, like people are going to be interested in it because it's aligned. And I mean, that's all I think obvious at some level, but it's really hard to get it right in practice. And that's something we see a lot of folks wrestling with, is that on Twitter and on a lot of these places on the internet, you see a lot of recommendations that are like, oh yeah, just do this. It's super easy. And it makes it all because you only hear from the successful people, but it's really hard to actually implement that in practice, because you have to really understand the audience really deeply, and you have to be able to do the kind of research on the advertiser side to think about, well, who's spending money in that place and how do I make sure it's aligned. When it is aligned, readers are getting ads that are relevant and that don't suck, and advertisers are advertising people they want to reach. And so then the thing that benefits everyone is more engagement with the community, more of those aligned readers, whatever, right? It's all this kind of virtuous cycle where the goals are the same from both sides of that marketplace. So that's the holy grail that I think folks are trying to reach for. And we've learned a lot now doing Letterhead, where we've got software that helps other publishers, do email advertising and so forth. That's a journey that a lot of folks are going on. And so we're having a lot of fun right now, like helping other publishers think through those things and kind of figure out their strategy. Because it's just really hard to get right. And ad sales is like a thoroughly unsexy thing. And most content creators don't get in the business because they want to sell ads, right? Even though it's a really valuable part of the business. So, that's part of where we're now trying to make a contribution to the space.
What are the biggest mistakes that you see publishers make when they go out to monetize their newsletter?
So one of them, I think, is selling the audience instead of selling the value proposition. And here I'm totally borrowing from Marianne, who's our head of ad sales, who brought this vocabulary to us. What folks will do is like, hey, I've got an audience of 20,000 people and we do content on this. Would you like to buy ads, right? And it makes sense to do that because you're the publisher of an audience with this size and you're trying to sell ads. But that's not actually what's in it for the advertiser, right? Like what's in it for the advertiser is I am trying to get people to purchase my product, or I'm trying to build my brand. I'm trying to meet a certain group of people, right? And if you come into a conversation and you say, hey, we're in the business of helping people connect with XYZ audience, right? And would love to chat about whether we can be helpful to you with that through our newsletter. It's a semantic difference, but it makes all the difference in the world to the advertiser because it does two things. One, you're leading with what your value is to the advertiser, not your value to your reader, which is, sort of next to that. But you're also showing that you have a mentality that is like, I am here to help you achieve your business goals, right? And if you're going to sell advertising at some level, you are in that business. And it's tricky, I think, especially for small teams, because you often start with the content first, and that's the passion point. And so it can feel icky, I think, to a lot of folks, certainly a lot of journalists that we've worked with over the years. It can feel kind of gross to like put that objective at the same level of importance at parity with the reader objective. But I think actually you're serving everybody better when you do that, because you're going to sell advertising anyway. And so if you're going to do that, it's much more effective to sort of start from, well, how do we make sure this is a good experience for everybody? So I think that approach is a huge mistake that we see people making, right? And then the second thing I would say is that we see folks getting into advertising or sponsorships and even membership or subscription revenue without having thought through the whole funnel and really thinking about, well, what does each part of that experience look like to the user, and what emotions do I want them to have, and what does that whole experience and life cycle look like for them? Because there's so much chatter in the space, like, oh, add subscriptions, add this membership program, add this kind of advertising. It feels like it's just like this off-the-shelf thing, like, oh, I'm just going to put this in my newsletter. But a lot of publishers are finding, the conversion rates to paid subscription are not as high as they are for some of the leading newsletters, or as high as some platforms want to promise you they're going to be. The ad rates are different, or the type of advertiser is like this, or you get one advertiser but you get 10 more. There's a lot of challenges like this around growth. So it's not as easy as just picking up this thing and flipping a switch, right? You have to think about, well, how does this connect and serve my mission and what I'm trying to do for the community? And if those things are really plugging in and driving each other in this cycle, that's where the success really comes into play. And so I think the second mistake we see people make is just kind of diving right into it and like, well, I need some ad revenue, so I'm just going to stick these automated ads in here. But if you have this really bespoke, high quality, high engagement product, it's really jarring for the user to open up their email and see and hear these like weird belly fat ads that look like they're from the dark corners of the internet. It's like it doesn't fit, right? And that says something to everybody involved. So you have to really think through those things and have that through line of like, what are our values? What are we trying to get done? And make sure that the business is commensurate with that, which again, a really hard choice to make when you're early and you're trying to make ends meet and pay the rent. But when you connect those points up, that's where the growth really starts to happen.
And you can't skip over step one, which is to build out a robust editorial product, whatever that may be. And I'd love to switch gears a little bit and sort of talk about that for Where By Us. How do you encourage your teams to approach their editorial strategy? How much guidance do you give them?
So we've come to a place where we set core vision and values for the product. What's the mission? How are we trying to serve people? What are we trying to get done? And then the voice and the tone and the kind of day-to-day approach, we leave all of that to each editor of each brand. And that means too that our products change as the editors change. I mean, in our brands that have been around now 6 years, we've had 3 or 4 different editors over the life cycle, and so they've had different voices and kind of slightly different feels over that time. And we actually have come to really like that because it means that the personality of the people working on it kind of shines through, and it doesn't feel like this sort of staid thing that's going to be around forever in exactly the same way. And so we set, globally, right, across all of our brands, we say, we're in the business of helping locals feel connected to their city, right? We have a tagline, live like you live here. That's the goal. Like, how do we help you live like a local, be a better local? That's the mission of the product. So that's set centrally. Some of the core tenets of the brand, like we're trying to aggregate and curate and help you stay on top of what's going on. We're not trying to add to the pile of shit you have to read, right? We're trying to help you feel more in charge of your news and information. We're helping you find ways to get involved and like go take action on stuff that you care about. So not just like, hey, this news happened, but like here's how to check it out, or like this restaurant opened, but like here's what you should go order there, or here, go ask for Tim, he's the guy who whatever. These kinds of things that make it actionable. So some of these kind of principles that we've set centrally that we think are really important, and then the day-to-day execution we leave to each of the individual editors. But the other thing I would say there is that one of the things we learned is that you do have to get to a certain audience scale before the rest of the business can really turn on. It depends on your audience and your niche, right? But in our business and in a lot of content sort of verticals that we work with now on the letterhead side, we see folks, 5 to 10,000 readers is where that gets interesting. If you have a really bespoke niche, super valuable audience, it could be smaller than that. If you have a really general audience, it could be more. But that's the general range we start to see as interesting. So one of the things we've also learned is like you got to get a newsletter to that as quickly as possible. But once you hit that kind of position, and even as you're doing that initial growth, the business elements need to be baked in from the start. I think that's really, when we talked about mistakes before, that's the other big mistake we see people making. They invest in growth, they invest in audience, and they build to a certain size, like that 5 or 10K. And they're like, okay, cool, time for me to start making money, right? And the challenge with that is it's really difficult to add those parts to the plane once you're already in the air. It can be done, like we did that, but you're going to be struggling for a while. It's a lot of work. It's much, much better to start from the perspective of, okay, given what I'm trying to do, how will I monetize in the future? What will those revenue channels look like? And how do I build that mentality, that language, and even test some of that stuff in the early days before I'm at the size so that I understand how this stuff works and I'm kind of hitting the ground running? Because we see is a lot of folks wait too long and then they get there to that certain audience size and they're like, okay, I'm ready to start making money now. But then there's this build-up period. It just takes time to get some of that stuff right and get it off the ground. And now you've got this kind of sag in the middle where you're ready, you're at the right kind of size and scale, but now you've got to start learning and figure out how to do these things. So you can put on the training wheels and then take them off while you're in the growth phase, so that once you're at a certain size and you can start really driving meaningful revenue, you know what those behaviors are. So waiting too long is one of the things that we've tried to avoid with our newsletters and with other folks we work with.
How do you manage the tension as you're growing to that initial 5,000 subscriber? The amount of, how do you manage the tension between the growth to get to that subscriber number that allows you to turn on other parts of the business, and keeping in mind longevity of the readers that are going to stick around with you as the business continues to grow. For example, I think of The Infatuation, which grew very slowly over, a 10-year period, or something like Food 52, where the business also grew very slowly over 5, 6, 7 years. How do you balance the need to get up and running and grow as fast as possible and scale and sign up thousands of readers versus finding readers that will stick with you, be genuinely interested and engaged in the product, and stay around for the next, for the long haul?
Well, I'm gonna crib from Mark Cuban here. It's like revenue and profit solve all problems, right? And so there's a certain extent to which I think a lot of folks overvalue getting that 100% right in the early days, at the expense of getting the financial gears of the business turning, right? Because it gets way easier to reduce churn, extend longevity, do better engagement with subscribers or better reader onboarding, whatever, when there's money coming in the door. It makes everything simpler, right? And we've definitely wrestled with that. We've had brands where, one of our brands started its life where it was getting like 60% open rates, really, really strong 50, 60% open rates. But it was stalling out at like 4 to 5K readers, right? We weren't seeing the growth as quickly because the team was really focused on that quality and that engagement, which is awesome. But, you're losing this sort of broader base. And so one of the challenges we would have looking at it from a business perspective is like, well, we can't afford to invest in growing this at the rate we'd like to because there's not enough revenue in the door yet. And so you can back yourself into a corner that way. Whereas if you were to say, hey, look, we got to 10K as quickly as possible and we're going to have some churn from that, but now that we've got some base audience size and some revenue that we're generating, now we can level that up. I think the other thing is sample size, right? There's two different things you have to know on the path to profitability that are really separate from each other, and this is what makes it hard. The first thing you have to know is like anecdotal, it's qualitative. Who are my core users who are going to love this thing and tell their friends about it and just like, I'm so glad this product exists. I couldn't live without it, right? That you're going to find out the first 1,000 true fans, right? Who are not like your parents or whatever. Like the first real users who are out there and really love it. And you want to understand those people as deeply as you can. And there's a lot of good advice out there about this for all products. Like, there's people who like love it a little bit or kind of whatever. You can kind of toss them to the side. You don't want to be like, I don't care about you, but in terms of where you spend your attention and your research. The people who love it and are like opening every day and telling you how much they love it and sharing on social, those are the people you want to double click. How can I learn everything I can about them? That's this qualitative thing. Those are the people you want to focus on serving with your mentality and your voice and vision and all that sort of stuff. But then as you go, you also have to get unit economics, which is quantitative. It's like, how can I get the cheapest number of subscribers? How does the average user stay engaged with me, right? Does someone who comes in from Facebook versus somebody who comes in from a referral versus somebody who comes in from an event, do they engage with me at different rates over time? Like these kind of data-driven questions, that's how the big folks, right, the Morning Brews and Skims and Hustles and so forth, it's all data-driven at that scale, right? That's how they get there. It's really tight unit economics. But you can't get that stuff without enough sample size. So if you've got 1,000 or 2,000 readers, or you're testing out some of these programs, you sort of don't have enough data to really make scaling decisions. And so you have to switch modes at a certain point. Eventually you want to be doing both, of course, but at some point you have to move from that qualitative, let me understand my super fans really intimately, to now let me get to a certain data size where I can run real numbers and get good information back. And that's a really hard transition to make because they're different skill sets with like literally different professional careers made in each of those things. And you as the newsletter producer are like supposed to do all of that and put out the product and monetize it. Like it's really, really tricky, but there's this mentality shift that happens that I think allows you to scale. And I can say all that because we have some of our brands that have totally nailed that and are now, really high growth brands. And then we have other ones where it's like, we didn't manage that transition as well or as quickly as we should have. And as a result, they grew more slowly. So we've seen in real time the way that can have an influence on the business.
Got it. Awesome. Well, I think that's all the questions that I had. And thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. And If folks are interested in what we're up to now with Letterhead, we're basically helping publishers monetize, create, publish their newsletters, and we just rolled out a new starter program, which basically we offer a lot of coaching and one-on-one and office hours with newsletter publishers to help them figure out monetization, how to sell ads, content strategy. We're doing a lot of service like that with folks who are working with Letterhead. So happy to hear from anybody who's interested. I'm Chris at tryletterhead.com. Folks want to reach out or just talk shop.
Perfect. We'll send folks your way. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.